So, good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to Overcoming Imposter Syndrome with Miriam McClymont and myself, Frances Dredge. Or are we? Time will tell. Today's webinar is brought to you by FEU Training, which is a partnership between Equity, the Musicians Union, the National Union of Journalists, and the Writers Guild of Great Britain. And in this instance, we've joined forces basically to support our creative freelancers in their career development through trying to develop the sort of business skills that are really important, things like finance and pitching and marketing your work, but also looking at the psychological challenges of being a freelance worker, where things like sort of motivation can be challenging, confidence building can be challenging, and in this instance, we're going to look at imposter syndrome. Mira and I were doing some research on this, and it seems that a lot of creative people do sort of suffer from this from time to time or all the time. So we thought this is quite an interesting one for us to look at. And we've had huge amounts of enrollments today. So obviously it is hitting a nerve with us. So I don't know why we're feeling like imposters, but we'll have a look and we'll try and help you with this as we go along. So what we're going to look at today is a little bit more about what imposter syndrome is as such. Then we'll look at the impact of imposter syndrome. It seems that, it can be quite negative on one's work, but also on one's life in general. So if we can, we want to eradicate it. Importantly, we'll look at how to overcome imposter syndrome and the strategies for that. And then sort of carrying on then to looking about how to be comfortable into your skin and recognize your value. So you can use a sort of a positive attitude towards yourself to motivate yourself and enjoy your life much more. And then finally, like many of these things, sort of it's about actually embedding it into your life, and it can take a little bit of practice, but it's eminently doable. So that's the sort of things we were looking at today. As I say, please, sort of ask some questions if you want to, and we'll answer them as we go along. So the first thing we're going to look at is, what is imposter syndrome? Muriel, good morning. Tell us more.
Welcome. And about imposter syndrome, really, it's a fear of being exposed as a fraud. And it's almost like if people could really see what I'm like, then I would be sacked, fired, rejected. It's something that kind of sits within, many of us. And we actually have two videos that we've referenced at the end. And one of them is Sam Neill. And both of them talk about, a lack of qualification and the fear that somebody will spot this and expose them. So it's quite interesting that, even people like Sam Neill can experience this. One performer I saw an interview online was sort of saying, it's like being on stage knowing that there's a bouncer at the door that knows you shouldn't be on this stage, and if he finds out she was, he would come and haul her off, which is quite extreme and quite dramatic. But it can really, this whole idea of imposter syndrome, it can be quite mild in that it's just a slight discomfort through to extreme anxiety for some people. So as Frances said, with the number of people who've signed up, it's obviously an issue in our arena. And that's not surprising when you consider that 70% of the population actually experience it. They've done a lot of studies recently that seem to reinforce this figure of 70% of the population, which I think sounds huge. But because they used to sort of think it was just women, and then they actually started to dig into it and actually go, no, actually, 70% of the population, all of us, have this sense of, are we good enough? Will we be found out? So, I quite like the quote with Bertrand Russell, where he says, the whole problem with the world is that fools and fanatics are always so certain of themselves, and wiser people so full of doubts. So I guess that makes us wiser people, because I know I certainly have experienced imposter syndrome. I had a previous career in the corporate world, and I was promoted quite quickly to the board level, and I always felt like, oh my goodness, somebody will find me out, somebody will discover I shouldn't be there. and it almost sort of like had a physical health impact on me. And really, it was like my own uncertainties that, I'd allowed to sort of bubble up. I would say I'm happy to say that I feel that a lot less. I think occasionally, if I'm in a completely new situation, a little bit will bubble up. But one of the great things I think about getting older is I care so much less about how people think and certainly what they think about me. So, I certainly know what that feeling is like. I know that gut wrenching, oh my goodness, what if they discover? So it's very common. But I love this idea that it's because, we're the wise ones. The thing about imposter syndrome that is unexpected to me and is interesting is that success can make it worse. And I wonder if this is because we've got more to lose. I think the more successful we are, the bigger the issue it will be if we're somehow exposed. And generally, the way we do this is we either work really hard, so we kind of like exhaust ourselves putting in so much effort, or we procrastinate till the last minute, and then just we wing it, or we say we wing it. But when people wing it, they generally take all the experience they've got and use it at the last minute. While successful, if they're successful in what they do, that's what they do. So that when they're successful, they put that down to either having put in a lot of effort or luck, and they don't put it down to ability. But the funny thing is, nobody else did it for you. The person that actually managed to have that success was you. The person who actually managed to get that job, do that job, was you. But these are the kind of tricks that we play with ourselves to make ourselves, feel bad, feel like imposters. And often it's a childhood strategy that we just haven't brought up to date, that we haven't just sort of integrated and worked in. I mean, who of us can't remember sort of like struggling to fit in, or, wanting to be friends with some people who didn't want to be friends with us, or trying to be not noticed because we didn't want to be bullied or picked on. Most of us have got some experiences of this. So we develop these strategies, and then we don't update them, so that we're no longer in that situation, but we're still running the same patterns. And then we have unhelpful scripts running in our heads, like a real, judging yourself all the time, like criticizing everything you're doing, have these rules of perfectionism that, you wouldn't apply to anybody else, but for yourself, you have these completely unrealistic standards. And then we have like self-doubt and low self-esteem, and that those can come from all sorts of places. And it's like parents and teachers and adults that work with young people often don't realize the impact some of their comments have. Nobody's trying to create self-doubt or low self-esteem, but sometimes that can happen, and sometimes people have difficult childhoods, and that's where it comes from. But really, it's something that can be changed. It's something that can be worked on. And there's two things I just want to sort of leave you with before I hand over to Frances. And one is, you're unlikely to feel like an imposter in every area of your life. It's generally just at work or just in a situation. So, the rest of your life, you're absolutely fine, and that isn't an issue. But the other thing I think that's important to remember is 70% of the population feel this. So, we run around with this underlying assumption that everybody else is sorted and cool, and actually they're probably not. So on that note, I will hand over to Frances to talk about the impact.
Yeah, and also thanks, Mira. We don't have to be sorted or cool. We can still be fine without feeling those things. But imposter syndrome can have a negative impact on ourselves and actually ruin our successes. I've noticed that somebody said they've already had a book published, but feel like an imposter because they needed a couple more books. Well, in some ways that seems, sort of really harsh on yourself. And if you're thinking like that about your successes, about your life in general, the journey in general, that can cause a lot of anxiety, because it seems like things are never enough. So you're never enjoying what you're doing, all that hard work and effort, can sort of seem like not like a positive thing when it should do, really. And also that can give us a sort of skewed version of our reality. So some of you might identify with this, that you look out into the audience, you've done a wonderful performance, everybody's clapping, but there's one person in the third row that's sitting there with clasped hands and a frowning face. Now, it might be because they've got a stomach ache, but you take that as, well, my performance must have been rubbish, And in the case, if you get a bad review, maybe if you're a writer, but everybody else was fantastic, you only concentrate on that, which is incredibly damaging for one, because in life we really need to concentrate on what we can do and really make the most of our successes to motivate us forward rather than actually hold us back in some way. So imposter syndrome, can be actually stultifying as far as your career goes. Also, so it's very, if you think about, with your best friend, for example, you would always encourage them if they did something well, you would say how wonderful that is, how talented you are. But it can lead, for ourselves, it can lead to the fact that we underestimate our skills, that we don't think they're valuable. We don't think that, so they're good enough and that anybody can do that, which is, if you think about it in like that, if you're your own worst critic like that, and it's not productive, then that can be, sort of really damaging. Also, I mean, in some ways, this is a cultural thing. It's people with imposter syndrome can't accept a compliment because they don't, value it. They don't believe the compliment. I've got a colleague who's incredibly bright, incredibly successful, but he always says, "Don't give me praise. I can't accept praise." Now, we talked about this, and he basically said, that his family are very demanding. He's not like sort of blaming them; they're lovely people, etc. But they're very bright too. An A wasn't really good enough. An A star was what everybody was looking for. So they were never used to compliments as children. Highly motivated to succeed, but not really enjoying that success and not really believing that success. And that's a great shame if you're working very hard, as we have to do as creatives. It's a very competitive industry, and our talent doesn't come out of nowhere. We have to develop it. So it's very hard, on yourself if you're not enjoying all those achievements that you're making. So a shame to have this sort of syndrome. And as far as positive feedback goes, well, we all need it, even if we're a very sound person, we value our own views, we know when we're doing well. Part of what we do as creatives is to get that fantastic feedback. But when you feel like an imposter, when you feel like a fake, you don't even believe that feedback. It's never good enough, so it's really quite draining on your energy and draining on your motivation. But conversely, while we don't accept positive feedback or maybe believe it, we're desperate for reassurance. So it's a catch-22 situation there, because unless you accept the feedback you're getting as something that's really valuable and wonderful, then, so you're not going to get that sort of reassurance. So it's a real double-edged sword here, and it can be quite difficult to handle and create that anxiety. And also, even when, sort of whatever you do is when it's the extreme situation, even when you've won an award perhaps, or, so if you've achieved something that's industry gold, sort of type thing, you'll still be thinking, well, anybody could have done that, or, that wasn't that good. Well, that's a real sort of really putting yourself down then when you don't need to. So it's important to think about it and address it. If any of these things I'm saying are resonating with you, it's time you looked into maybe a little bit deeper to see why you're doing this. I love this quote by Groucho Marx. I don't know if anybody's ever seen some of the old Groucho Marx black and white films, but this was one of his famous quotes where he's basically saying, I refuse to join any club that would have me as a member, and that's sort of quite true. So like if people will accept you, then you actually doubt the person, and this is where sort of it can have an effect on other people, on your working relationships, because if you feel you're a fake, if you feel you're not good enough, and if somebody has to constantly reassure you, then it can be absolutely exhausting for them. I think most of us have come across very needy people who seem to drain the life out of you, and everything you say is just dismissed or not taken as valuable, and that can be quite hurtful and quite offensive if you're trying to give somebody some positive feedback or trying to give them a compliment and they just dismiss it out of hand. It's not good for your working relationships or your social relationships either. And you can see that sort of behaviour or sort of attitude towards compliments and positive feedback would really put people off doing it in the future. So really important to look at, sort of how you're thinking, how you're feeling about this, to see if there's any sort of ways of overcoming this. And we're going to talk about that next. But just before I asked Mira to look at some strategies for us, I just want to sort of make the point basically that imposter syndrome, for most of us, it affects us, sometimes more than others, sometimes when we've had success, but not necessarily huge anxiety, just anxiety that, sometimes gets us down a bit, and we could sort of eliminate from our lives to feel better about everything. But like with any sort of mental health problem, or when some things are overwhelming, whether it's whatever the anxiety is triggered from or the stress is triggered from, we would say, sort of do get help. There's no shame in asking for help. So if you're feeling overwhelmed at any time and you can't get out of yourself through using self-help or webinars like this, then do think about asking for help, because some of these anxiety sort of related problems can be overwhelming, and you don't really want that to keep happening and be overwhelmed and it to completely stop you in your life and your career. So importantly then, so how are we going to, if we're recognizing imposter syndrome, I think many of you are saying that you certainly identify with some of the things we're talking about. So if you do recognize that you feel this way or you think this way, how do we overcome this? Because I think, it can have a negative impact on our lives, and we want to be as positive as possible, enjoy our lives as much as possible. So Muriel's going to look now at some strategies. Muriel, tell us more.
There've been a couple of comments about focusing on the negative, which I just want to pick up. Only in as far as these strategies I'm about to share with you, a lot of the focus is on trying to shift that bias towards seeing the negative side to actually seeing a more realistic and broader view. There were also some comments about negotiation. The thing about money is, and it's usually money, is that it taps into these feelings of imposter or inadequacy or not worth something, and if you struggle to negotiate the right rate for yourself, it can be to do with this. So it's definitely a symptom. We don't have time to do much on negotiation at the moment, but we do have a recorded webinar on negotiation, and if you live in London, we've got the negotiation workshop coming up next month. So but it is all related. So on the strategies, the first strategy is, what are you using as your measure? Because if you are new into the business and you're comparing yourself to someone who's been doing this job for 30 or 40 years, you're not going to come out very well, and nor should you. It's like there's a lot of stuff that comes with the experience and the practice that, you've just started that journey. And even if you've got 10, 20 years under your belt, if you're comparing yourself with someone who does something quite different, who's had a different path, it's not useful. So when you think you could have done better, what are you comparing that to? What are you using? And what you could use instead was, well, how would I have done that 6 months ago? How would I have done that a year ago? So you start finding other ways, comparing your own performance to your previous self rather than other people, because I don't think it's a useful or meaningful comparison. Another thing to bear in mind is, are you still being paid? Because there are very few organisations now that carry passengers, that let people keep collecting the money if they don't actually value what they're doing for that money. So it's a very basic measure. But if somebody's still paying you, somebody rates what you're doing. So, that, especially as a freelancer, nobody keeps a freelancer if they don't need to. I think we all know that. So it's not the most elegant of measure, but it's certainly a valid measure. And how do you measure other people? I mean, when you look at others' performances, how do you rate them? How do you sort of, what's the give or take? And how do you do if you apply those measures to yourself? So I think that's the very first strategy, is to start questioning how you're measuring your performance or your success or how you're working before you actually go, oh, that wasn't as good as therefore it's useless. I think it's about pausing and shifting that focus. And then there's this thing about recognizing that your feelings are not the same as facts. And what I mean by this is, you know, if you do something, have a performance, or you've published something and you feel great about it and you think you've done a great job, and then something happens or somebody says something and a little seed of doubt creeps in, and then that little seed of doubt grows and grows and grows until you convince yourself it was horrible, it was useless, it was embarrassing, I wish I'd never done that. And I say that as somebody who has actually done this in the past. I don't do it these days, but I have done that. And then you've completely skewed reality to a point that you've just sort of gone, you behave as if it was the worst thing that ever happened. And actually you've forgotten that people were cheering or that you got some really great feedback. So when you catch yourself doing this, I think it's time to sort of step back and say, what really happened? What's the objective evidence? You know, what is the feedback I've had from other people? You know, apart from maybe that one dissenting voice that actually sent you on that spiral in the first place. You know, what other evidence have you got to say that went well? And again, using some of the measures I just talked about previously might be a good place to start. And yet, sometimes we get things wrong. Sometimes we fluff a line. Sometimes we spot a typo in a published book. You know, I've seen that. I've done that. You know, so sometimes mistakes happen, and you can feel stupid about it. But just because you feel temporarily stupid doesn't mean you are stupid. So it's this separation with how you feel at any given moment with who you are and what you're doing. It's like, it's not a fact. You know, just because you feel bad doesn't mean to say you are bad. It doesn't mean to say what has happened is bad. So it's really, instead of beating yourself up, you know, see what if you have made a mistake, forgive yourself like you would anybody else, and see what you can learn from the situation. Find friends and colleagues that you trust to give you a balanced and truthful opinion. I have a friend who's a singer, and he has this friend who's quite a strong critic. And he gets this friend to come to every performance. And he doesn't want to know on the night. On the night, he's not interested. He just wants to take the feedback from the audience, enjoy the gig, and go home. But the next day, this friend gives him sort of feedback, critical feedback on what he maybe could have done better or what he should have tried, or maybe some responses. And he finds that really valuable. So, you know, it's better if you've got a friend who gives you the positive and the negative. He kind of braces himself because he knows this guy always just gives the negative. But, you know, it's using it. He uses it in a positive way. And that can be helpful for some people. But what we are talking about and what the comments are saying is what we're looking at here is a negative bias. We're looking at our natural bias. I'll use the same word, I'm looking for something else. And we're looking for this negative. We're looking for the bad. We're looking for the proof that we're not good enough. We're looking for the proof that we've failed. We're looking all the time for the downsides. And I would say a new habit to create, because that's what we're talking about doing. How can we shift our habitual negative focus onto a more positive one? And I would say for every negative thought you can have, find 3 positive aspects. So find something you learned, or, you know, something that you liked about it, or something that, you know, made you laugh, something that you thought was interesting. So find 3 positive aspects every time you actually hit a negative one. And it will be really tough to start with, I suspect, really difficult, but you're trying to change a mindset. So it's definitely worth persevering with. And then that bit that we touched on earlier about compliments. Learn to accept a compliment gracefully. I saw somebody saying on the chat that they'd been told off for rejecting or pushing back on a compliment. And I had that experience. I mean, I'm the youngest of 5 and I'm Scottish, and we don't dish out compliments lightly in my family or my culture. And I used to spend my life, you know, it was almost an affront if somebody gave me a compliment, and I would like be batting it off as if it was something terrible. And somebody turned around and sort of basically went, "How do you think that makes me feel? Are you calling me a liar?" And it was like a bucket of cold water over me, because I hadn't stepped into their shoes to imagine what it felt like. But if you imagine a compliment as a gift, that somebody has chosen and thought about and, spent money and care and attention on, and is holding this gift out to you, then not many of us would sort of sweep that aside and say, take that rubbish away, it's worthless. So you've got to recognize that the person that's offering this didn't need to. Nobody's forced them to. They're not, and they're saying something that they actually mean. So while it might be uncomfortable to start with, my advice, and this is advice I did actually do myself and have learned to do, is whatever else is going through your mind, just say thank you and then smile. And it'll be a real struggle for some people in some situations, but it's incredibly powerful. And having always batted away compliments, I remember the change when I started just saying thank you. It really did make a difference. So highly recommend that you do that. And the other thing you can do with imposter syndrome, because the way we do imposter syndrome is we get really busy in our heads, and we're so busy criticizing ourselves, we're so busy telling ourselves what we're doing wrong or what we're not understanding or what mistakes we might make or have made, that we don't actually have the capacity to take in what's happening in the room. And I see it, I've put up light as a picture because I see it as when you're in your own head, it's like the lights are shining in your eyes. So you can't actually see what's happening in the room. You're too busy with the stuff that's going on in your head. And I imagine most of you have had that experience where you've been so busy in your head, you've missed a comment that's been made in the room. You've not heard something that's been said. So I say turn those lights out and get the focus into the room and start seeing, one, how you can join in the conversation. See, give yourself a break from all the fault finding and actually sort of see, what everybody else is saying and see if there's something you can join in on or something you can contribute or a question you could ask. And check around. Remember, 70%, check around the room, see if anybody else could do with a bit of a reassurance, or if somebody else is in their own world that maybe you could engage them in a conversation and make them feel a bit better. And then if somebody gives you a compliment, make sure that your response to that compliment makes them glad they said it. And that's the challenge I throw out to you all. Or those of you who struggle taking compliments. Not everybody does, I get that. Another strategy for dealing with this is, in an appropriate environment, admit how you feel. Now, I'm not suggesting if you get the starring role in a West End show that you walk in on the first day when everybody's getting together and say, folks, gather round. I actually have this huge anxiety about being here. I'm not suggesting for 1 second that you do that. But there are occasions when you're with trusted colleagues or trusted friends that you can just say, do you know, I feel this. I have this sensation sometimes that I'm not good enough, that I'll get found out. And one, you might be surprised by how many people say, oh, I feel that too. And two, it's actually liberating just to admit it, because it feels like you've just let this secret out. So it can be really freeing. And again, it makes it less of a hidden monster. So it can be a real way of actually putting it to rest. And sometimes actually saying it out loud reduces the impact. Because when you hear yourself saying it out loud, part of your brain is actually weighing that up against the fact that I'm doing this and I'm doing this and I'm doing this and these people are saying this. And actually saying it out loud can help to dispel it or reduce it a little bit. So that's definitely a strategy worth trying. And then how about applying the same strategies to other people that you do to yourself? So if other people are allowed to make mistakes and can be forgiven, why can't you? Because mistakes are human. Perfection is overrated. All that, it's okay to get things wrong. Everybody does. And if you would forgive other people, forgive yourself. And if you can appreciate someone else's contribution, don't go and dismiss your own as though anybody could have done that, because it's very likely that everybody couldn't have done that. There's something about you and your unique contribution that has got you in that position to do that job. So rate yourself the way you would rate other people. and recognize that in any team, everybody doing their thing, their way, is what makes the team rich and strong. And you're as much of a part of that as anybody else is. So if you recognize that in your team or any group that you work in, recognize that that applies to you too. And I think that is actually anything that you would say about other people, recognize that there's a very high chance that that would apply to you as well. So then if you find yourself giving someone some reassurance, someone who's had negative feedback or somebody who's actually really upset about something, just have an out of body moment and listen to what you're saying to this person and store it up. So the next time you're in that situation, you know what to say to yourself to help make yourself feel better. Another strategy is to change the script. You know, we all have these inner voices, and you know, many of us have a really powerful inner critic. And there's multiple things we can do, and we can actually start by making the voice kinder. So if you've got this hectoring internal voice that goes, "Why did you do this?" You know, soften it. Use the same words, but just soften the tone and just see the impact, the different impact that that has. And then work on the message. And, you know, instead of, if you've got something going around all the time saying, "I should know everything," change that to something like, "I can learn something here." I mean, imagine walking into a big meeting with lots of people and walking in with this, "I should know everything," compared to walking in going, "I can learn something here." It's got a completely different feel to it. So start listening to what you're saying to yourself and start making adjustments to it. You know, instead of having the, "I can't ask for help," have something like, "It's good to work in a team." Because if one person in a team thinks they've got all the answers and actually thinks that they know what's best, the team loses, the team becomes weaker, because everybody sits back and goes, "Well, we'll just wait for them to make a decision, no point in us contributing." So walking in thinking, "I can't ask for help," is a real pressure. Walking in going, "It's good to work as a team," again, it feels completely different. Instead of that feeling like, "I'm not good enough," you know, change that to something like, "What can I do here?" You know, and focus on that. And then there's one that catches a lot of people, is how you use the word sorry. And an awful lot of people, and I know it can be cultural as well, start a sentence with sorry. You know, "Sorry, I just want to say," and what are you apologising for is the question. And I would keep asking yourself that question every time you use that word sorry. And I would save the word sorry for those occasions when you are genuinely apologising. Because if you imagine just cutting the word sorry off the start of every sentence where you currently use it, then instead of saying, "Sorry, I just want to say," and just saying, "I just want to say," it has a completely different impact. And often people, that word sorry is a bit triggering as well, because sometimes people use it in a passive aggressive way. But people who use like the "sorry, I only wanted to say," generally the people who do it that way do it because they haven't spoken up earlier. So it's about actually learning, drop the sorry, speak up when you do have a thought or you do know something, and just listen out for that word sorry, because it can really get in the way and add, and again it reinforces, because then everybody else thinks, "Oh, they're sorry, they're making this statement, therefore it's maybe not as valuable as everybody else's contribution." So you're flagging up to everybody, "I'm apologising, therefore, you know, I don't really mean what I'm saying, or I don't give it much weight or importance." So it's a really important word to look out for. So my suggestion for your homework after this webinar is find your go-to phrases. You know, find what the things are that you say to yourself that make you feel really bad, or that really get in the way, and come up with some more useful alternatives. And again, these are things you've been saying to yourself for years. So you're not just going to do it overnight, stop them, but start noticing and then start using substitutes. So a new habit can form. And it's like it's something you just have to persevere with, but you will get there. And the last one is to imagine the situation going well. I mean, one of the best ways you can feel awkward in a situation is to imagine it going badly. And most of us who worry about whether we should or shouldn't be in a situation are outstandingly good at this. And we sit and we go like, oh, well, they'll hate us, the audience will hate us, the group I'm with will hate us. And so turn that on its head and use it in a different way. Imagine it going well. Imagine the same situation that you're planning to walk into, and sit down, close your eyes, imagine people looking happy to sort of see you, imagine the thing going well, imagine, it just being fun and you enjoying it. And do that, especially if you've got something coming up you're worried about. Do that regularly as it's approaching. And, the closer it gets, the more you do this, the more relaxed you're going to feel about doing it. Now, it's not going to change. Well, I would say it can change what happens, because if you walk in all tense and anxious, there's a very high chance things won't go as well than if you walk in relaxed and comfortable and happy. But, if something major is going to happen, it's out with your control, then that's going to happen anyway. And if you've had a worry few weeks beforehand, you've got all the same ability to cope with it as you would if you'd worried about it. So you might as well enjoy the build-up and actually, recognize that it's perfectly valid to assume things are going well. I mean, that's not to say you don't, plan for things not going well. Of course you've got sort of contingency things, but the thing you're going to run in your head that you currently might be running in your head to say it's going to go badly, switch that round and have it going well. And I really suggest you try it. It'll make quite a difference. And I'm going to hand back to Frances now. I think I've talked long enough. Who's going to talk about taking up your space?
Great, thanks, Muriel. So I think from what you've been saying, actually, from the comments we've had, a lot of people basically are in some ways their own worst enemy, and they're very successful but don't value and appreciate it, and that's part of the imposter syndrome as such. So the challenge here is, so to look at these strategies and see, where you identify with what we've been saying, what strategies would work best for you, because not all of you will want every strategy, but a lot of this is actually sort of retraining yourself, the way you react to things, so that you do accept, so the good stuff that happens, and that you learn from things that go wrong, but you really accept and relish all the successes rather than deny them, because that's quite cruel to yourself. And I suppose what our challenge to you would be was to think about this and challenge you to take up your space. Basically, people who have imposter syndrome as such are really uncomfortable in their own skins. They feel anxious, they feel guilty when they are successful. They think have a sense of foreboding that things are going to go wrong. Well, when you find yourself sort of thinking like this, as Mira was saying, go through these strategies and think, okay, is this real, or is this a learned behavior from the past? How am I going to actually feel comfortable in my own skin? Once you give yourself the permission, basically, that you have a life, you have successes, you have a right to your space as such, and you can take it up, it feels so much better than when you're always slightly kowtowed by your own thoughts, by your own reactions. What you'll find is that if you start sort of persistently and consistently recognizing what you do, valuing what you do when you do it well, then this will help you to move forward. It'll give you motivation and self-confidence and all those sort of positive things that we need, basically, to build on what we've done so far and to move on to the next amazing thing. If you keep, keep feeling guilty, or if you keep feeling you're a fake, this can be very inhibiting and stop you from doing the great things that you possibly could do and taking the risks that you might take otherwise. Also, quite a lot of people apparently with imposter syndrome are quite perfectionist in their thinking. Now, while we always want to do our best, we need to produce high quality work if we're going to work in this industry. It's all about new ideas and good ideas. But if you are a perfectionist, then you won't be able to let things go. And if you have imposter syndrome, even if people tell you that things are perfect, you won't believe them. So you're back into a quite a difficult sort of way of thinking, basically. So what we want to be aiming for is to think, sort of, okay, things can go wrong sometimes, but I'm going to learn from that. It's okay. And with this sort of taking up your own space comes confidence. Now, you'll find that people who are confident are comfortable in their own skins. They're comfortable, when they are successful, and they relish that success and they enjoy that success, and that gives them buoyancy. But also, they don't have to be right all the time. They understand that things, you don't know everything, things can go wrong, and all we can do when things go wrong is learn from that and move on from that, rather than focusing on that particular thing, because we think, well, of course it would go wrong, I'm a fake, I'm a fraud, so it's that sort of thing of trying to stop yourself thinking that and appreciate where it's going right and learn from where it's going wrong. If you have this sort of attitude, if you can just dissipate this syndrome of always feeling like, sort of things are not quite good enough, it'll help you embrace new challenges. Now, as freelancers, we need to be, make sure our game is sharp. We need to learn new skills to adjust to new demands in our industry. We need to make sure that, we are taking risks sometimes. If you've got a new idea, to actually pitch it to people, for example, is a risk. People might say no. But if we're feeling confident about ourselves, if we are taking up our space and comfortable in our skins, we're much more likely to do that. So really, that's where we want to get to. And by doing this, rather than feeling the guilt, rather than feeling somehow that anxious about what we're doing in our lives and the successes that we're achieving, we're going to be far more relaxed. And when we do get criticism, we can view it as either constructive or something that we can dismiss, as in, we find it much more easier to judge what criticism is useful and what criticism isn't useful, and just something that we can push off our schedule as such, our thinking schedule. Also, this helps us to make better decisions. If you're feeling relaxed, if you're feeling confident, sometimes people procrastinate when they have imposter syndrome because they don't feel good enough to move to the next step. But if you're feeling comfortable within yourself, then you're much more likely to be able to make those decisions. And even if the decisions don't lead to the results you want, it's still fine because it's moved you on to the next step. And by all this sort of feeling better about yourself, feeling comfortable about yourself, it's bound to improve your performance and make sure you have sort of more movement in your progression. And also, at the end of the day, we all want to enjoy ourselves and we all want to enjoy our lives. And if you can't enjoy your successes and thrive off those, then it's pretty tough. So always, so we want to challenge you to do is challenge yourself to take up your own space and relish in what goes well and learn from what doesn't go so well, so you can feed it back in to keep moving forward rather than stopping yourself in many ways. But even when we recognize that we have imposter syndrome or recognize that we need to make some changes, it's not always a quick fix and it can be quite difficult. So what Mira is going to look at to finish off with really is how to embed this into your life, how to keep ensuring that you're reevaluating the way you think and thinking and feeling in the best way that helps you rather than in ways that actually put yourself down. Muriel.
Hi, I just want to respond to just a couple of comments that have been. I mean, Sally says something about she gets bored very easily with her achievements. She gets something and she masters it and then she moves on, and that can be a great way. That can just be your preference. It can just be how that you need that change and that challenge to sort of thrive. But from an imposter syndrome point of view, sometimes it can be as soon as you master something, you don't value it and you don't rate it. And, if you want to keep going for the challenge and you want to keep going to be stretched, then that's great. That's probably something you really thrive on. But if you're running yourself ragged and into the ground because you've got to keep being challenged, because as soon as you can do something and master it, it suddenly becomes completely meaningless and worthless to you, then maybe it's worth actually just pausing and thinking about that and sort of saying, well, actually, look how much I've learned. Look how broad my skills are already. you know, what else can I do with this apart from binning that and moving on to the next challenge? So I put that out there. That may resonate with some other people, it may not. Another thing that I think it was Elizabeth said something about, you know, this negative planning, this like running the negative scenarios through your head are almost like a mental shield. And I really get that, because, you know, I remember it's kind of how I was brought up, you know, expect the worst and then you won't be disappointed. so you run around your whole life expecting the worst. And I mean, the downside of doing that is it limits what you can aim for, and it limits possibilities. So, you know, you open up a whole new world where you can plan for the worst. By all means, plan for the worst, you know, so that you've got plans B, C's, you know, and you've got contingencies and you've got savings and you've got all these different things. But you know, you've got to allow yourself to sort of kind of see the possibilities of the upside. And that exercise I was talking about, that you kind of got that flurry of comments of actually imagining it going well. All it does is it just kind of calms the system down. It's not to say I'm going to unrealistically, you know, plan for my whole life being some sort of Pollyanna dream. You know, it's not suggesting that for 1 minute. But once you've done your planning, once you've set things up, once you know what you're doing and you know what you're aiming for, you're just allowing yourself to idly daydream of it all going to plan. And that's no worse than sitting there imagining it all going disastrously badly. So that's really what I'm talking about. So I hope that answers some of the comments that were in the box.
Yeah, just one other thing, Muriel. Somebody is saying, I've sort of slightly lost it now, but somebody was saying that they set too high goals for themselves and then don't achieve them and then belittle themselves for not achieving them. I've got any advice? So yeah, well, my first thoughts there really are, you know, sort of what to look at your goals, and firstly, are they the goals that you want to achieve? Because often with goals, we sometimes set things that we think we should achieve, or that somebody else wants us to achieve, but we don't really want to ourselves. So we've just set ourselves, you know, sort of a target that's never going to happen. So the first thing I think, are these my goals? And the second thing I think of is, if you're, we want to be challenging with goals, but we don't want to be so unrealistic that we set ourselves to fail. So another thing I do is always break my goals down into sort of smaller chunks, basically. So, and really analyze is if I've got the resources to achieve this goal, not just the will, but also the way. So, for example, if I want to write a book, if I say I'm going to write a book within 3 months, well, maybe that's not realistic for me, considering my resources are also taken up by other work, by, you know, some other things. I need to invest time and energy into it. So maybe 2 years would be a better target for me. So it's still the same goal, but you're changing the actual deadlines for it. So you're changing something so you can achieve it. What do you think, Muriel?
Yeah, I mean, goals are one of my favourite topics. I mean, we do have a webinar recording, and I think we're maybe going to do a rerun of the goals webinar this year. But for me, it's about having an overriding direction, and beneath that, your goals. And goals need to be flexible. You know, if you've got a huge goal that's off in the distance, exactly what Frances is saying, have smaller goals beneath that, and then actually recognise and celebrate what you have achieved, and not use, because sometimes it can be a deliberate way of beating yourself up. I'm going to set this goal. I know I can't really make it. I know it's so far out of reach. And then when you don't make it, you've got a good reason to sort of give yourself a mental kicking. It's like think about what you're actually doing with these, and find ways to do your goals in a way that you can actually see progress. Because even if you have a big goal and it's really important to you, you know, getting halfway there is an achievement, and getting halfway there will have had you doing things that were interesting and challenging and all the rest of it. So it's about finding different ways to look at things instead of having it digital. You know, I did it, I didn't do it. You know, it's kind of like goals need to be a bit more fluid, and they need to be a bit more flexible, and something that should be in support of what you're doing, and not the thing that is your overlord and master sort of like bearing down on you. I don't know if that's useful or if I've gone off on a tangent. Good. Any other comments there that you can see, Frances?
Yeah, just one about Sally was saying, what about catastrophizing imposter syndrome as partner in crime? You're quite right, Sally. I mean, this is another sort of mental habit, really. We have to train ourselves out of it. It's that you probably heard that saying, most of you, that, you know, sort of, I've been through some terrible times and some of them actually happened. You know, we can be, once again, rather than being our best friend to ourselves, we can be our own worst enemy, where we start off saying, well, you know, I didn't quite get what I wanted. And before we know it, we're actually homeless in a ditch, basically, because we've catastrophized so much. We've gone down that road. You can be happily cleaning your teeth in the morning, and the next thing you really depress yourself. So that's another thing, you know, that when you find yourself going off on a tangent that isn't realistic, try and stop yourself. And it's a matter of training yourself to stop yourself and think, is this realistic? Is this really happening? And even if it is, this way of thinking is not going to help me. So what can I do about it, rather than what's the worst case scenario I'm actually imagining? What do you think, Muriel?
No, absolutely. I mean, it's like these fairground skewed mirrors. You know, it's like you're stepping in front of them and suddenly you and your world looks completely warped and skewed. And that's what the catastrophizing, that's what the 100% negative focus does. So it's like, you've got to find a new mirror. You've got to find a new way of looking at this situation that more appropriately and helpfully represents the situation as it actually is, and not as its worst possible outcomes. So yeah. So work in progress. Just rounding up, I would remember that 70% of the population experiences this at some time or another, which means it's normal. You know, and for those of you who don't want to be normal, I'm sorry. But to me, it's quite a big comfort that this isn't something that only warped individuals like me have experienced. It's something that, you know, it's something that is in a lot of people. And if you believe what Bertrand Russell says, you know, it's like all the best people experience imposter syndrome. So we all experience moments of anxiety and doubt. And actually, you know, we don't want to get rid of that, because there are times that actually that really helps us. But it's instead of actually just completely succumbing to that anxiety, we go, hang on a minute, is there something we can do about it? How can we find positive aspects to the situation? How can we be more balanced about how we perceive it? Because in a way, what we do is we take a slight wrinkle and we turn it into a disaster with the way we're thinking about it. So, and we don't have to do that. We're doing that all on our own, you know. So instead of just saying, oops, I mean, I would say that's one of the most useful words I've had in my own journey to getting over this. Because it used to be, if I made a mistake, it would be, oh my goodness, the world is collapsing. It's like Chicken Little lives. The sky is going to fall on us tomorrow. And now I make a mistake, I genuinely, internally, to my core, go, oops, what can I do about it? And, you know, that is a far more comfortable place to be. So, you know, turning it into a disaster is self-inflicted self-torture, and we can learn to stop doing it. So these strategies that we've shared and the ideas in the chat, and remember, this is recorded, you can watch this again. I will be sending the presentation. So work through, some of the strategies will work for you, some of them won't, but find the ones that do and start using them regularly. Just a second. And I find it helpful to remember that you're not alone. We're not alone. You know, looking around at the people that you work with and knowing that there's quite a few of them are possibly feeling the same anxieties, but nobody's got permission to feel that. So everybody kind of covers it up and hides it. So making it your mission to help other people feel more at ease has a positive impact on how you feel, because it takes that focus off your own internal processes and out into the real world. And you can do an awful lot when you're actually present and in the real world. And that's what we strongly recommend as a great first step. And also remember that a little bit of anxiety is not a bad thing. I mean, I know some performers who, if they didn't have a few nerves before they went on a stage, they would retire, because it's an essential part of their performance. So we're not saying anxiety and nerves and a little bit of worry is a bad thing. but, you know, actually letting that take over is a bad thing. So practice makes perfect. The more you apply these strategies, the easier you're going to find them to do. And that includes using your computer in that pose. I expect you all to be doing that by the end of the month. You'll find me in St George's Hospital if I try that. But the thing is that over time, the feelings of being an imposter will diminish. If you work on this, if you actually recognized that this is a skewed vision of the world that you're living in, and actually start taking steps and working on your mental processes when you're dealing with these things, these feelings will diminish and may even disappear altogether. So as I say, it's not to say you're never going to feel nervous or anxious again. It just won't be your normal state in any situation. And you won't take it to those you'll be a lot less likely to take it to unhelpful levels. So that's our homework. Use strategies, think about these things, recognize that there's a slight skew to these negative feelings that, you know, you're allowing to take charge and take control back. Take back control. Sorry, I shouldn't have said that. But any questions?
Yeah, just one comment actually from Catherine was saying that do you think imposter syndrome can be contagious, because she's very qualified to do certain things, but because she's underconfident, then, you know, she thinks that this may, you know, sort of have an effect on people's decisions. And I think you're right, Catherine, because if people can sense desperation, they can sense insecurity. And if they think you're desperate and insecure, then why would they, you know, sort of, it's not convincing to hire somebody who's desperate and insecure. What you want to hire somebody is competent and has expertise. And of course, you know, if you're feeling like a fake, or if you're feeling not good enough, then it'll be, as Mira was saying, it'll be your language will be giving you away. Things you say, some small words possibly, but building up a picture of, you know, sort of people thinking that you're not convinced of what you're saying. But also your body language will give it away. Perhaps you're not making eye contact, perhaps you seem very nervous, etc. So those sort of things will give an impression that you're not committed and to what you're saying, and you don't believe it. So it's really worth working on this, just to see where improvements can be made, so that you do feel comfortable within your skin. And when you actually do tell people what you do, it comes across as something that's believable rather than something that you're nervous in. Because if you think about it yourself, if somebody is nervous about what they're saying, then you don't believe them. And also you think, well, if they're not confident, then why would I be confident in that? What do you think, Muriel?
Absolutely, I agree with all of that. There was another comment about how do you feel confident without, or how do you get confident without being arrogant? And I think the two are so far apart. True confidence, when you see somebody who's behaving arrogantly or behaving like, they're not confident. They're generally overcompensating for a lack of confidence or an insecurity, you know, or they're just bullish and rude. But true confidence to me is about being comfortable in your own skin and actually being, you know, open to what's happening where you are. And to go back to what Francis was saying, the thing about actually, apart from your body language and giving it away, if you run around sort of going like, oh, I don't know why they gave me this job, I'm not sure, you do put doubts, you sow seeds of doubts in everybody's mind. So, you know, but the whole thing, this fear of being confident, kind of comes from, I think, an incorrect definition of what confidence is. I mean, for me, one of the most confident people that I admire is Barack Obama, and he never comes across as arrogant, because he's thought things through. He's completely at peace with who he is, and he's completely calm and open to people disagreeing with him. And I think it comes across as just beautifully confident.
Yeah. And confidence is not the same, you know, so confident people don't say, I'm right, I'm always right. What they tend to say is that I'm confident enough to sometimes think, well, I didn't know that. I didn't know that answer. I might find the answer to that question, but I didn't know it. That's absolutely fine. You know, we're not meant to know everything. Otherwise, our life would already be complete. It's the fact that to admit that, but be confident in what you can do. So we hope, we're sort of coming to the end of our session now. We hope that's been helpful to you. We really sort of challenge you to look at, sort of the way you're thinking and feeling about yourself. And if nothing else, sort of successes can be really hard to come by, especially in our competitive world. But it would, if you can get to the point where you're really enjoying, the journey and what you do, at least much more than you are now, and that's going to be fantastic. What a shame, to have on-call. Somebody was saying that they have on-calls, but don't like to go take the on-call because they don't feel they deserve it. Well, that would be your way of thinking that needs to be changed. But to do all that work to get a massive round of applause and then not enjoying it seems such a shame. So hopefully what you'll do is you'll go away and have a good think about this. And try and apply some of the strategies we put into place. It's not always a quick fix, but it certainly does work. And both Mira and I know this because we've both gone through it and, sort of come out the other side as such. It doesn't, you may not always feel like completely comfortable in your skin, but generally the idea is to generally feel better about what you're doing, and it certainly can be done. So if you've got any other questions, please do email us. We'll be sending you out the email ASAP, and also the recording will be up online. Next month, we're doing another sort of popular request, basically, is dealing with uncertainty, which, of course, as freelancers, a lot of us have at certain times, not all the time, but, we have to sort of manage the future as such. So we hope you'll join us for that on the 26th of November. We'll be advertising that soon. Yes, and so good luck. You're not an imposter. Most people who feel they're imposters, as we originally said, are incredibly talented. But it's that sort of recognition of what you're doing, what you could do with your own perceptions that would make it better. So good luck with that, and hope to see you again next month or at one of our live workshops. Bye.
Bye. Bye, everyone.